And hello. Sorry I'm running incredibly late today, but yeah, a lot's happened. Like, a lot. So, yeah. Let's just be glad I'm here. And big thank you for the intro to my good friend Brainless for like helping me out with that. So, thank you. Hang on a second, get it there. There we go. Oh, now it's just video. And it's right. Hello. But yeah, rebranded because like when I created the Vila Vendetta thing, that was just like my online name. It wasn't. I hadn't created it with YouTube in doing YouTube in mind. It had been like a nickname that I'd had for ages. It was a nickname that was kind of come up with for various things when I was trying to do like performances and things like that. Yeah. And now, like, yeah, I'm still Vila Vendetta, but the channel is horror history because, like, they're the two things I want to kind of like do. So, yeah. Rebrand was kind of last minute, I guess. Just kind of did it and forgot to tell people. So it was like I kind of like nuked my Discord and forgot to tell everyone, and because of that, so many people thought they'd been like banned from the Discord. And we're like, oh my god, have I been banned? What did I do? And it's like, so I know I just deleted the Discord. Sorry. Whoops. Hey, Sydney, love. Oh, that's all right. Thank you for dropping by while you could. Love you, sweetie. Right. So, good news. So, like I said, I think it was last week, where I told everyone I'm not sure what's going to happen with the channel for the time being because I'm no longer going to be able to live in this place, and then it's going to be a process where we're going to have to go like be in a emergency housing and all this stuff. Well, funny story. Turns out the Section 21 was sent by accident, so I'm not actually being evicted anymore. I'm here for the foreseeable future, which may or may not be that long because the reason I got sent the notice was because my landlady wants to sell the property. And she called up the letting agency, asked what the process was, and yeah, it got sent by accident, basically, because she wasn't selling right now. They assumed she was selling right now. It's a thing. So like, I'm not being kicked out yet, basically. So yeah, I may be having to leave this place soon, but I don't know when. It depends when she's going to sell, basically. And because she's got a leasehold, not a freehold, she needs to buy some more years for the leasehold. So it's a lot. Yeah, like I hadn't been forced to leave yet, so that's good. They gave me my 2 months notice, and we found out, funny enough, we found out when I got an email from my agent, not the sales department who dealt with the eviction bit, like the legal department, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, my agent sent me an email saying, "Oh yeah, here's the here's the invoice for like the next year. Here's like the monthly amount you're going to pay, as per our discussion." And I'm like, why are they sending me my new rent price when I'm being evicted. Like, they're telling me how much I'm going to pay for next year when I'm not going to be here for next year. Like, that doesn't seem right. Yeah, and that's how I found out that it was messed up, because we called up and I was like, what's going on? And they're like, oh yeah, shit, that was an accident. You ignore that. Yeah. So I went on a massive depressive episode, freaking out, because I'm like, great, me and my daughter are going to be homeless and it's going to be all ha. And then like my daughter was getting really upset, and it was this whole but it's okay for now. So that's what that matters, and hopefully I will get a council house before they sell the property. So fingers crossed. But long story short, we're okay at the moment. So yeah, that's good, you know. And I'm sorry, Professor Curious, that your landlord's a div. Like, it's annoying because I've got to admit, my landlady is absolutely lovely. She is really nice, and that it kind of shocked me when it came out of the blue that they were selling, because I have a really good rapport with my landlady. So finding out that, like, without warning, she was just doing this was a bit of a shock, because like I would have assumed that she would have like sent me a message and like said, oh, I want to do this, you know, and prepare, because like she knows I'm a single mum on benefit. She knows how difficult the system was, because she used to be manager of a nursery. She knows through talking with other people in my situation through her work. So yeah, it was a bit of a shitter, but oh well. Not a problem anyway. And I have also kind of oh shit, I'm so sorry, hon. I'm glad you've got a better landlord now. Yeah, I've got a new setup where I've decided to use my TV as a computer screen instead. So now it's big and all the words are big, so it's easier for me to read. Because my dipshit ass lost my glasses. Yeah, and can't see too well far, like, say far away. Far away is a short distance now. May or may not have broken my eyes. So I've promised 3 stories. I had 3 stories, but they're very long stories. So yeah. You're right, you jammy bastard. Fancy seeing you here. And yes, I lost my glasses. Like, come on. What are you, my fucking mum? With I got lost, and not my sanity or my will to live. Perspective, you know? Anyway, so I've got really long, short. I'm going to go with the shorter one. And I'm going to save the worst one for last, I guess. And let's also say trigger warning on one of them. Yeah. No, is it gone? Where's it gone? Phew, there it is. Okay. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Okay. This is Attention shoppers, please hide at the back of the store immediately. Attention shoppers, came a male voice over the intercom. Please move to the back of the store immediately. The back of the store? I whispered to Daniel. Don't they mean the front of the store to pay for our stuff? It was 8:50 p.m. 10 minutes till closing time. We brought our two kids out on this late night Walmart excursion in the hopes of burning off some energy. Instead, they'd just thrown tantrums for new Legos and Hot Wheels. It was a disaster. But apparently the disaster was just beginning. Please move to the back of the store immediately, the voice repeated overhead. This is not a drill. I glanced around, but the other shoppers were just as confused as I was. An old lady looked up at the ceiling, scrunching her face. What the hell? Oh, scrunched her nose up. What the hell? Asked a dark-haired woman. My God, sentence structure. What the hell? A dark-haired woman asked her boyfriend, pushing a cart full of garden supplies. Didn't you hear? An old man said, leaning over his cart full of bottled water and canned food. We're in a tornado watch. One touchdown in Sawville. A tornado? It was definitely storming outside. I'd seen the black clouds roll in from the east earlier, but it didn't look that bad. Do not stay out in the open. I repeat, do not stay out in the open. There was a pause, then an explosion of sound as everyone began to mobilize. Carts rolling, panicked voices, feet slapping on the floor. No, 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 this can't be happening. I hurried down the toy aisle, Tucker in my arms, Daniel and Jackson following me. 3 zigzaggy turns, and then we were in the electronics area. I glanced at the TVs on the wall and pictured the 4 of us crushed underneath them. Stay away from windows and doors, the voice continued on the loudspeaker, and do not attempt to exit the store. Is it safe here? Daniel shook his head. Big open areas aren't good. I'm going to check in the back, see if there's a break room or something. You stay here, okay? I nodded. Arms shaking, I sat down on the ground between 2 shelves of video games. Tucker sucked on a bottle in my arms while Jackson began to giggle. Is a tornado going to hit the store? And everything will fly around real fast? He asked, with a big stupid grin on his face. I don't know. A tornado, a real live tornado, like you see in the movies, ploughing through our town. It was so unfathomable. We were New York natives, transplanted here to India only 6 months ago. I'd never seen a tornado watch my entire life. Daniel jogged back into view. Everything's locked up, he said as he joined me on the floor. But listen, Fairview's a big town. The chances that it'll hit this Walmart, I think we'll be okay. I never should have brought us here. You didn't know. None of us did. He wrapped his arm around me. They should have warned us, like an emergency alert on our phones, or a tornado siren, or something. The voice overhead rang out again through the store. Do not stay out in the open. Do not make yourself visible. That includes security cameras. Please move to a spot that is not visible to any cameras. I frowned. What does that have to do with tornadoes? A feeling of unease in the pit of my stomach. I glanced up and saw several black globes descending from the ceiling, hiding the cameras within. I guess we should listen to them and get out of sight, I whispered. I grabbed Jackson's hand. Daniel picked up Tucker and we jogged out into the centre aisle. The store was an eerie sight. Abandoned shopping carts, askew in the aisle, full of everything from pies to batteries to plants. Footsteps echoed around the store from people unseen as they found their new hiding places. We dodged a shopping cart full of soda, ran through kitchenware, and then stopped in the Easter decoration aisle. There was a camera in the central corridor, but as long as we stayed in the middle of Easter aisle, we'd be invisible. The four of us crouched on the floor next to some demented-looking Easter bunnies. "I'm hungry," Jackson whined. "Shh, Mommy." I grabbed a colourful bag of chocolate eggs and ripped it open. "Here, candy, happy?" whispered, thrusting them into his hands. Then I leaned back against the metal shelves, panting. I didn't have long to rest. A mechanical whine overhead, and then the voice came through the speakers again. "Keep away from aisles with food. If you have food with you, leave it and move to a new hiding place. If you have any open wounds, cover them with clothing." What the fuck? That had nothing to do with keeping safe from a tornado. "We should run for it," whispered Daniel to me, starting to stand. "But the tornado... I don't think there is a tornado. Listen, do you hear any wind?" I listened, but all I heard was silence. No howling wind, no shaking ground, no projectiles clanking against metal roof. Maybe it's still coming. I know what they're saying doesn't make sense, but to go outside... We need to get out of here now. He grabbed Jackson's hand as he held Tucker in his arms. "Come on." "Daniel, I don't think that's a good idea," I whispered. But the next words from the intercom changed my mind. "Assume a fetal position and place your hands on your head. Close your eyes and do not open them for any reason." Let's go. We broke into a sprint and ran down the central aisle. Cameras be damned. The front door appeared in front of us, a little black rectangle looming in the distance. And as we got closer, I saw Daniel was right. There was a tree at the border of the parking lot, under a street lamp. It was perfectly still. We continued running past the clothing area, past the snacks lined up at the checkout lines. I ran towards the sliding glass doors, and as fast as my legs would carry me. Almost there, almost there, almost... The doors didn't open. No, 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 no! Daniel slammed his body against the door. It rattled underneath him. I tried to squeeze my fingers into the gap between them to try to pull them apart. They didn't budge. They locked us in," I whispered. "I want to go home," Jackson said. Tucker was beginning to fuss too, making little noises, like he was about to start full-on wailing. I turned around, and that's when I saw him, a Walmart employee. He was sitting on the ground at the end of one of the checkout aisles, facing away from us, wearing the familiar blue vest with a golden starburst. "Hey, let us out!" He didn't reply. "Did you hear me? I don't care if there's a fucking tornado. Open the door and let us out." Again, he said nothing. But in the silence I could hear something. A wet, smacking sound. I stared at the man, slightly hunched over, facing away from me. Was he eating something? The speaker overhead crackled to life. "Attention, please do not talk to any Walmart employees." My blood ran cold. The smacking sound stopped, and then slowly the man began to stand. He placed his palms on the conveyor belt and pushed up, and I could see that they were stained with blood. I backed away, but my legs felt like they were moving through a vat of honey. No, no, no. My fingers locked around my arm and yanked. Come on, shouted Daniel. I sprinted after him deeper into the store. Tucker stared at me over his shoulder, and Jackson ran as fast as his little feet would take him. I was vaguely aware of the slap, slap, slap sound behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Daniel ran into the clothing area, and I swayed, dodging circular racks of t-shirts and wooden displays of baby clothes. He skidded to a stop and ducked into the dressing room area. In here, he whispered, motioning at one of the rooms. We piled inside and locked the door. Daddy, Jackson started. You listen to me very carefully, I said, crouching to his level. You have to be absolutely silent. Do not say a word, okay? Jackson looked at me, then Daniel. Then he nodded and sat down on the floor. I'm going to try and call 911, Daniel whispered, transferring Tucker to me and pulling out his phone. He tapped at the screen, then frowned. What? We don't have signal. We don't. I don't. Thump. I grabbed Jackson and pulled him away from the door. The four of us huddled in the corner. I held my breath. Thump. Under the gap of the dressing door, men's feet in black shoes. They slowly took a step forward, deeper into the dressing room. Don't move, I whispered, holding Jackson. The man took another step. Don't make a sound. Don't move. Don't. Tucker let out a soft cry. The man stopped. His feet turned, pointing at us. No, 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 no. Tucker let out another cry, louder this time. My nails dug deep into Daniel's hand. No. A hand appeared. It slowly pressed against the floor, stained with blood, and then his knees appeared as he lowered himself down to the gap. No. Could he fit under? The gap wasn't small. It was like a stall to the bathroom. He flattened himself against the floor. There's a chance he could fit under. I watched in horror as his stomach came into view, his blue Walmart vest as he lowered his body to the floor. Then he pushed his arms under the gap and blindly swiped it across the floor, as if feeling for us. This is it. We're going to die. And then he lowered his head. His face. Oh God, there was something horribly wrong with his face. He smiled at us with a smile that was impossibly wide, showing off blood-stained teeth. His skin was so pale it was nearly blue, and his eyes, they were milky white, without pupils or irises. I opened my mouth to scream. Attention, shoppers! The voice began overhead. No, no, no. Please make your way to the front of the store and make your final purchases. We will be closing in 10 minutes. What? And then, before I could react, something unseen jerked the man out of view. A strange dragging sound followed, as if someone was dragging his body out of the dressing room area. I stared at the door, shaking, as Tucker's cries rang in my ears. But he didn't come back. And within 10 minutes, the usual hubbub of Walmart returned. Voices, footsteps, shopping cartwheels rolling along the floor. Shaking, I finally got up and unlocked the door. The store looked completely normal. People were lined up at the cash registers, placing their goods on the conveyor belts. Employees were scanning tags, printing receipts. People walking towards the glass doors. And when they did, they slid open. As we walked towards the exit, I spotted the older man who warned us about the tornado earlier. What what was that? I asked, unable to keep my voice from shaking. He shrugged. I guess the tornado missed us. What a miracle, huh? Giving us a smile, he disappeared out the glass doors and into the night. There we go. Actually, that's a point. What state did it say it was in? Where did it say? They went to Indiana. Is Indiana a very pro-gun state? Yeah, I think you're right. Because people were literally at the registers where some Walmart employee's been feasting away on something. Does that mean that was a dead body? What was he eating if it was covered in blood? Yeah, it's NASA. They were getting rid of the flat earthers. Hmm. Maybe. Though I can just imagine, right, with how draconian working as a sales employee in America has been lately, that that was just a Walmart employee that was told being dead isn't a good excuse for not coming to work. So get out your coffin and get to work, bitch. Walmart are so desperate for employees, they're resurrecting the dead with zombie power, like zombie magic. Yeah. I mean, you could imagine it, couldn't you? Sorry. Bag. One. I think that's one of the short ones. Yeah. Wait, what? Conspiracy people think that Walmarts are connected. I mean, it does sound very efficient for stocking the shelves, but then why are they always out of stuff? Yet they hadn't crushed someone's soul enough. Right. Now we have someone or something visited us last night and it wasn't friendly. 6 years ago, me and my boyfriend, let's call him Tim, moved to a house outside of a small town we both grew up in. The place was a bit of a fixer-upper. The previous owner had been smoking indoors for the past 20 years, which made everything inside take on a yellowish tone. Another thing to take care of was the dense forest that had started no more than 10 metres away from the outside of our house. We were both young and eager to have a place to ourselves, so we didn't mind the extra work that came with our house. The following years we repainted both the inside and outside of the house. We cut down trees to make a garden and we built a chicken coop. I started cultivating crops and he built a garage to work in. We created our personal paradise on earth, and it has been our safe space up until last night. Ever since I was a child, I've been able to see things other people don't. It happens less and less frequently as I age, but I can still stumble upon misplaced energies from time to time. A few years ago, when I got up to get a glass of water in the middle of the night, I stumbled over a little girl that was standing by the foot of our bed. It's hard to describe an encounter like that to someone who hasn't experienced it, but you can somehow feel the visitor's intent. This little girl didn't want to do us any harm, therefore her presence didn't scare me, and I could easily go back to sleep. I usually don't talk about my ghostly encounters, as I fear people might consider me mentally unstable. I sure know that I have questioned my own sanity countless of times because of this, but over the years these visits have become what I consider normal. However, what visited last night wasn't. That's why I've decided I need to tell you about it. I really need your advice. Tim and I went to bed early. A couple of hours later, I woke up by the pounding of my own heart, and it was a very unsettling feeling. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, so this confused me. I looked over to Tim and saw that he was moving around anxiously in his sleep. I cuddled up to him with my back facing the bedroom door and closed my eyes in order to go back to sleep. That's when I heard a creaking sound coming from the corridor leading up to our bedroom. My eyes flung wide open once again, and this time Tim woke too. The look he gave me conveyed that he wasn't entirely sure why he had woken up. I pressed a finger against my lips in order to keep him silent. That's when the creaking returned, this time a little closer. We both turned slowly towards the open door leading to our bedroom. It felt like the pounding of our hearts could be heard miles away. As our eyes adapted to the darkness, a silhouette started to appear in the doorway. The humanoid form in the entrance to our bedroom was skinny, tall, completely hairless. It stood hunched over, and you could see its protruding joints under the stretched, pale skin. The worst part was that the head on top of its bony shoulders had Tim's face. Where Tim's eyes should have been were instead small marble-like eyes filled with hatred staring back at me. The absence of eyelids amplified the intensity of the stare by 100-fold, and the smile, that God-forsaken smile, will haunt me forever. It stretched from ear to ear and opened so wide that its jaw must have been dislocated. The creature started staggering towards the foot of our bed, still staring intensely into my eyes. The real Tim started to reach for the light switch on our nightstand, but as he did, something started slithering out of the creature's mouth. It was its tongue. It became longer and longer until it reached the level of the creature's collarbones. When the light filled the room, the creature smiled even wider without taking its hateful eyes off me. The next thing I remember is waking up to the sun shining through our bedroom window. My heart was still pounding, and I cuddled up to Tim once again. He was already awake and put an arm around me as I started to tell him about the nightmare I'd had during the night. The more I told him, the paler he became. When I started describing the creature, he begged me to stop. I shot him a troubled look and asked why. My heart dropped when he told me that it couldn't have been a dream, as he experienced the exact same thing. I don't know what it was that visited us last night, but it sure didn't feel like any of my previous encounters. The creature has malicious intent, and it knows how to get inside our house. Please help me. What should I do? I really don't want this day to turn into night. Wait, what? There was a tale in the UK of an employee duct taping his colleague to a radiator after dying, so his family could claim his paycheck. All because death was only claimed after rigor mortis had set in. What? And yeah, the connection between the two were for like patients being wheeled from one section to the other, mostly for dead bodies and also for like TB and infectious diseases and stuff like this, like because tuberculosis was like massively bad in most places across the world. It's still bad, don't get me wrong, but most first world countries don't have to worry about TB that much. But yeah, not good. And I will say what's immensely funny to me is the comments on this one. Go to your nearest shaman. This woman says that she is a ordained minister and is saying go find a shaman. Person saying, of course, It's a skinwalker. It sounds like a skinwalker. Like skinwalker is the flavour of the week. You know, like everyone's now learning about a skinwalker or Wendigo. And they often use those terms interchangeably when they're not the same thing at all whatsoever. Different folklore, different tribes that believe it, and they act and behave differently. And if that was a skinwalker and or Wendigo, they would not have survived. And yeah, like it doesn't work that way. It's something else. Oh damn, curse proof. Fair play. Who and why did someone try to like death curse you? Oh, that's all right, bro guy. You've not missed the final longest story. How are you, by the way, darling? Yeah. Beware the vagina ninjas. Goddamn vagina ninjas. They'll get ya. Yeah, we're good, thanks, darling. She's actually doing really good. Recently got an award from school, another one. She gets quite a few of them, actually. And a jazz magic. That sounds a bit racist. Because, like, is he referring to like jazz magic, like New Orleans, where they practice hoodoo and voodoo? Uh, excuse me, like hoodoo and voodoo and like other forms of Christo-paganism. Yeah, I know. The only magic you believe in is chocolate softies. I know, I know. So why would he do jazz magic if he is Nigerian? He's probably trying to scare you, thinking, oh my gosh, they know voodoo. That's just weird. And like it doesn't make sense because a lot of the times there's this kind of belief that you can't curse someone in another country because like there's this weird belief that like you need the dirt from where they are, right? And if you're in another country, it's not the same land, it's not the same dirt, blah blah blah. I don't know. Like it like magic is kind of fascinating. Like the beliefs they have and the properties they assign things and like these rules that get attributed to stuff is really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, well, see, I've heard of them saying juju because juju is karma. It's like, oh, that good juju, bad juju. It's affecting like your luck, the goodness in your life. Da, da, da. Yeah, see, this is why I say it's weird. The idea of this, like lands and da, da, da. Yeah, pretty much. It only does something if you think it does. Like most curses are psychological, right? The energy the victim puts into it makes it happen. So, like a lot of the curses say there are two kinds of curses, right? Breaking them up from a outside point of view. There are the curses that you do, and they're more for you, like healing, getting someone out of your life, blah blah blah. And then there are curses that are meant to hurt the person, and you let the person see these curses that affect them because they psychosomatically put energy into it, and the ones that you're using to get rid of people, blah blah blah, they work on you, and they're the ones that you keep near you. And it's almost like a reminder every day, like avoid them, stay away from them. Da, da, da. Like there's one where like you put a picture of someone in a glass jar in water in the freezer because you're freezing them out of your life. And the act of doing this physical thing is cathartic. It's giving you closure, and it's a physical action that makes it easier to like do this. It's quite interesting, really. What? Pickle people? I mean, it sounds like a basic form of a moppet, which is like a voodoo doll, but not voodoo. It's like the non Haitian version of the voodoo doll. Anyway, I'm going to get on with the next story because I could talk like this for ages. Right, this one's long. This is going to take me ages to read. Right, let's move you over there. Wait, what? Skinwalker in the jar. Okay. I found the bunker of a prepper family who went missing 3 years ago. Dr. Daniel Vance was a smart man, too smart for his own good, maybe. 40 years old, a lecturer in fluid dynamics with a mind made of shapes and numbers. No one knew why, but one day, on a whim, he crunched the numbers on the apocalypse and came to a troubling conclusion. He didn't share exactly what it was he deduced, but given that he immediately quit his job, liquidated his many assets, it's fair to say it wasn't positive. Swept up in the wake of his tremendous upheaval was his wife, a 24-year-old PhD student who had grown infatuated with Daniel some time before. She loved the strange bear of a man who could easily build a log cabin as he could explain the idiosyncrasies of an asteroid's orbit. Speaking to Daniel always left you with the profound impression he was right. So when he told her what he wanted to do, she agreed. 15 years and 5 children later, the Vances were living in the distant woods just beyond my hometown. They were enigmatic, richer than the Pope, and extremely serious about their prepper lifestyle. But they were also funny, easygoing, and incredibly compelling to speak to. Larger-than-life survivalists who swept into town with bizarre requests that thrilled local businesses. Vast quantities of cement, iron, lead, and steel were all shipped through the remote mountains so that the Vances could build their shelter. The advanced methods they used to keep it secret were legendary. Daniel had once spent 6 months earning the license necessary to drive HGVs up to his compound so that no one would lay eyes on it. And on one occasion, when a company had refused his request for GPS tracker-free vehicles, he bought them out wholesale so that they had no choice. So when they stopped appearing in town during the pandemic, when requests for food and goods stopped and all contact was dropped, most attributed it to lockdown. They had a bunker and had spent their entire lives training to be self-sufficient in the face of civilization's collapse. Even Alexander, the youngest at just 3, was already collecting firewood as a chore and learning what local plants were edible. Most of us just assumed that if anyone could ride out COVID without breaking a sweat, it would be the Vances. The reality turned to be something else. When the worst came to light, we discovered that Daniel had used the pandemic as an excuse for a dry run. The family intended to spend 6 months in lockdown and essentially beta test their fallout bunker. 3 months in, and the sheriff received a distress call on the radio. Coordinates were provided by the hushed voice of a sobbing child that most assumed was Alexander, even though that's never been proven. The police arrived and found the bunker still sealed. It took hours for emergency responders to cut into the door. All the while, efforts were made to contact the family, but to no avail. Once inside, the police were left dumbfounded. There was no one to be rescued. No bodies, no survivors. There was evidence the door's locking mechanism had failed and trapped the Vance inside with no way out. But if so, where had they gone? Beds and cots lay everywhere with moulding yellow sheets, buckets close to hand with stains all around them. Some doors were barred, others smashed to pieces. There was evidence of makeshift quarantines and, in places, what looked like violence. The police, usually a fantastic source of gossip, were not forthcoming until the town demanded answers, and the sheriff was forced to only offer the barest of outlines. An outbreak of a waterborne illness had struck the Vances down not long after they were locked inside and unable to seek help. Rumours of contagion were overstated, fueled by the unrelated rise of COVID. Whatever contaminant had killed the Vances, it was non-organic in nature. No need to panic. The Vances' loved ones have been notified. The bunker was going to be demolished, and we could all put this terrible tragedy behind us. Of course, we still had questions, thousands of them. Why hadn't the family called for help? They had radios, computers, smartphones. They were survivalists, not Amish. And where were they? What had happened to their bodies? Why hadn't they simply left? We shouted these and more at the town meeting, but the police simply refused to comment. For most of us, the excitement lasted another week or two until we realised we weren't getting the answers anytime soon. Besides, the pandemic was in full swing, and most of us had other things to worry about. The tragic story eventually faded until it was just one of those awful things in the town's history that we didn't talk about. I was as guilty as anyone else of just forgetting about it. I certainly never expected to find the bunker out there in the woods. Faded police tape still on the door that hung wide open with scorch marks around the lock. It stood out in the woods like someone had cut a hole right in the fabric of reality. The darkness so deep and black it almost ached to look at. The sight of it made my heart drop into my stomach. It radiated pain. Does that make sense? I think some part of my lizard brain pricked out details that wouldn't become apparent to me until I got closer. Like the bloody finger streaks that stained the handle from where someone had scrappled furiously at the lock without success. And the tiny viewing window that had been smashed with a hammer that still lay nearby. I needed only to glimpse at it to imagine the family taking turns to stand there and scream into the woods, desperate for rescue. And yes, Brogo, we are at that point. COVID ghost stories. Under any other circumstance, I would have run. But I'd gone there looking for my dog, and my light revealed a few wet paw prints making their way down the dusty concrete tunnel. Half Burmese, half collie, Ripley is the sort of dog who trembles in my arms when a storm busts the windows, and needs his paw held when we brush him. I love him. I do not have much of a family, or a wife, or even many friends, but I have Ripley, and I could no more have turned around and gone home to an empty apartment where I would have to sob my grief away than I could flap my arms and fly. He was my dog, and I'd raised him since he was a puppy. I wasn't going to leave him out here in those woods. I went in after him. Yeah, the ghost of COVID past is someone who's wearing like ghost of COVID past is someone who is denying it exists, right? We've got two versions of it. Someone denying it exists, or someone that's literally like mask, hand gels a lot, like toilet roll, everything. The ghost of COVID present would be. Do you know what? I don't know. Ghost of COVID future would be where like a mask has like fused to someone's face, like our DNA has changed. We now have like a filter ingrown into our face. Social distancing ghost. Woo! 6 feet! Woo! That would be funny. And the only spirit it's on about is 70% proof for fucking antibacterial purposes. Yes! That would be amazing. Right. It gets very dark from here on out. Right? It 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 gets fucked up from here. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Whatever the police had found, they'd not only kept most of the morbid details to themselves, they'd also lied. The bunker was not demolished or even sealed off. In fact, looking at the occasional blue latex glove tossed aside and the one or two broken police issue flashlights, it seemed like the last people inside had been in a hurry to get out. Given this was where 7 people had presumably died, I assumed it was someone's job to clean it up. But the corridor looked largely untouched. Just a few meters in, and the manic writing started to cover the walls. Desperate scrawls of a lone survivor left there to be discovered like cave paintings. Most were deliberations on how to get out. Diagrams, blueprints, equations and formulae, all focused on the door and the circuits responsible for the faulty lock. I instinctively assumed they belonged to Daniel, and he'd been the last to die. What a god-awful fate for a man to outlive his children. And yet it got worse. Slowly the writing changed from equations and plans to a desperate scrawl. The same phrase repeated over and over. 5 doors. 5. Not 6. 6. Didn't make it. Didn't make it. 6 doors. 6. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd find in an asylum. A psychotic rambling punctuated only by 6 paragraphs right at the end. Each letter was impeccably neat, and each small paragraph was topped with a beautifully drawn Christian cross. Elliot Vance, aged 15, a gifted guitarist. He liked boys, even though he thought I did not know. I loved him with everything I had. He would have made a great man. Alicia Vance, aged 14. She liked to paint and to shoot. She had her mother's mean streak. It would have served her well in the future. Elijah Vance, aged 8, the smartest of us all. These were Daniel's memorials to his family, and seeing the words lit up by my torch was a haunting insight into the overwhelming despair he'd endured. He must have realised he wouldn't get the chance to speak at his family's funeral or to write their obituaries. This was his last desperate way of making sure the world might one day know them as he did, as real people. The words marked at the end of the tunnel, standing adjacent to the trapdoor in the ground. It was not open, but the tunnel came to a dead end immediately afterwards, and Ripley's prints disappeared at the hatch. I feared he might be in danger, but I still stopped and looked at the bunker door 20 meters behind me. The once gloomy forest looked so bright, even on this cloudy day as the air dotted with rain. A part of me felt like I was leaving the whole world behind as I began to climb down the ladder. I entered a large circular living space that was packed with furniture and little nooks and crannies. The walls were covered with folding beds and tables, and every inch was multifunctional. A dining space could become a sitting space, which in turn might be where someone slept or even exercised. It all depends on what particular bits of furniture you unfolded or unclipped or unfurled. 7 people in close quarters, nowhere near enough privacy. It made sense they went with this cluttered, overlapping use of space. But it was still a large room, bigger than most studio apartments, and there were a few corridors that led deeper into the earth, telling me the bunker had unseen depths. I looked for a sign of my dog and soon found his trail, but this far from the rainy corpse of Riley's prints were starting to fade. After barely a few meters, they petered out, vaguely in the direction of a nearby door. I wanted to follow, but stopped myself from rushing onwards. It was unlikely Ripley was getting out any other way, and I'd do us no good getting hurt myself. I decided to take a look around quickly and spotted a dinner table. Yeah, apparently the dog fell down the ladder, fell down the hatch, I don't know. If I needed proof the police had not bothered with a clean-up, this was it. The plates were still out, the food rotten into a strange blackened husk. A child's hat lay across one place setting, the once creamy fleece turned a sickly green and yellow. The chairs had their backs reinforced with wooden beams fitted with the long grooves that something the width of a nail could slide into them. And on each of the cushions was a foul-smelling stains that looked oddly like an arse print. I touched one with a gloved hand, and the material cracked audibly. Whatever it was, similar stains were on the cutlery and the plates. There were even handprints of it placed firmly on the tablecloth. First, I thought it was blood, but that wasn't quite right. It was too contained to be from leaking blood. On the back of one of the chairs, a stain tapered exactly where a woman's waist would be, like a near-perfect silhouette. I shivered as I remembered that Miranda Vance had always been a slim woman, and wondered how she had left her imprint on the grey fabric. Using my torch, I saw these stains repeated in the oddest of places. Yes, there were some on the beds and blankets, and even patches of the floor, exactly like you might expect in a room of sick people. But why did one stain on the floor bear such a strong resemblance to a child huddled in the fetal position? And why was the same stuff all over the TV remote, and on books on the shelves, and board games too? Everything from sofa cushions to DVD boxes and piles of dirty laundry were covered in the same dried brownish material that gave off a foul coppery miasma. I found the jigsaw particularly baffling. Someone had set up another table with 4 chairs, all modified with the same back support as these, by the dinner table, and a jigsaw had been laid out with 4 separate piles, but only one was depleted. The rest looked largely untouched, almost like someone had portioned out pieces for 3 other people who had absolutely no interest in going along with it. Maybe Daniel had tried to keep up morale while the family was sick. God help me if that were true. I couldn't help but imagine the poor man sat there with his loved ones close to death, desperately trying to encourage them to click their own pieces into place while they faded in and out of consciousness. Something about that room emanated madness the longer I stayed down there, flickering the bright disk of light of my torch onto the details to another, the more I wanted to leave. One door had wooden beams nailed across it. One sofa had been partially disassembled. Multiple beds had been burned, and all the light bulbs had been removed and put into a box on the kitchen countertop. Looking up at the ceiling, I finally had some insight into why the police were so confident the Vances had not survived. Despite never finding their bodies, someone had jammed a human finger into one of the empty sockets, almost like they'd expected it to glow with the flick of a switch. What was it about this place that had caused the police to leave and never return? Not to even take that finger to test it for signs of illness, or even just to confirm who it belonged to. I decided it was time to hurry up and find my dog. People had died in that place, and while I'm not superstitious, I can't be the only skeptic who has done the calculations in his head and realised it costs nothing to be respectful of ghosts. The bunker was cramped, terrifying, and the air stank so bad I started to worry I'd get sick myself. It served no one any good to linger, but I'd be damned if I just walk away and leave Ripley to rot down there. It's not like he could climb down. It's not like he could climb a ladder and get out of this place on his own, even if I wasn't entirely sure how he'd gotten down there in the first place. Summoning what little bravery I had left, I called out and broke the silence. Something which felt like a terrible taboo in that god-awful place, like screaming in a graveyard. God, then he wouldn't want to know what I've done in a graveyard. Ripley! I waited and hoped I'd hear the pitter-patter of his paws, but for the longest of moments there was only the kind of silence that makes you wonder if someone or something in the darkness is holding its breath and trying to look like just another patch of nothing, biding its time until you finally turn around and show it your back. The TV came on with a blurt of white noise that was so loud and so sudden I cried, threw my arms up, and nearly fell backwards onto the rolled-out sleeping bag that looked like it had spent a week in the sewer. By the time I realised what had caused the noise, I could already hear a tinny rendition of Daniel's voice. I realised the issue here. I need to emphasise just how little I understand anything that's... I frowned at the screen as I approached it. It showed a greenish infrared view of the bunker, with Daniel up front, and the dinner table behind him. It was grainy and hard to see, but I could clearly tell that his family was sitting in those chairs. Miranda was the first to fall ill. Looking back, it makes sense. Miranda often went into the storage to fetch food for cooking, and we found it behind one of the refrigerators. So that's... shit. One of the figures in the background slumped onto the table with a loud clank and sent the plate spinning off to the ground. Shit, shit, shit. Daniel muttered as he got up and grabbed the woman by the shoulders and sat her upright. Miranda never did like my cooking, he snorted, a laugh as he fussed with something at the back of the chair. The rod's much better than the tape. All those hours spent taping them upright to chairs never worked. But the rods, they fit right into the spine, and with a little modification I can just slot them into the chairs. That way everyone is able to join in for dinner. I'm working on something similar for a family game night. Daniel wandered over to the camera and with a grin he lifted it from the tripod and scanned the dinner table. What I saw made me drop my torch. His family were long dead. Gaunt faces, missing noses, lips that were reduced to reveal awful grins. These were corpses, plain as day, even when viewed through such a low-resolution image. The only thing that made them seem remotely alive was the way their eyes still reflected the infrared back, so that they glowed in the dark. And yet Daniel seemed oblivious to it all. He tousled Elliot's hair, kissed his wife on the cheek, and ran a hand across one of the young girl's shoulders. He even picked up the young Alexander from his high chair, and I assume coddled him. I don't know for sure because I looked away, unwilling to see the poor boy up close. Eyes averted from the screen, I couldn't help but pan my torch across that same dinner table and shiver as I finally realised what those stains were. Not quite blood, but close. Liquefying flesh. Left alone for months, Daniel had not put his family's bodies to rest. Instead, he had moved them around from place to place and puppeted them, living life as if nothing had changed. Looking at where those stains had settled, I saw a clear pattern emerge. He had put them to bed. He had set them at dinner. He had propped them up to watch TV or gave them their favourite books. They even sat there as lifeless husks while Daniel waited for them to complete a fucking jigsaw. That horrified me to my core. Back to work. It's obviously not part of the original design. No room on the other side, not on the blueprints. Elliot didn't believe me. And why would he? I made every inch of this place, but I did not install that door in the storage room on the bottom level. I checked the cameras and some of the photos I took during the build, and the wall is just blank. But the door is there now, and it must lead somewhere. I don't know when or why it opens, but it does, and the next time I'll be ready. Because I have to know what's on the other side, and why it did this to us. Alone down here, often all sleep at once, anything could have slit our throats and been done with it. But it didn't. It took its time, and I have to know why. It took our radios, our computers and phones, one by one, none of us noticing until it was far too late. I kept telling the kids they needed to take better care of their things, and even as they complained, I just assumed the phones were lying behind some shelf. Where else could they go, locked in a bunker? But it wasn't the children at all. Looking back, there were so many signs. Who kept taking away the lights? Who kept draining all the batteries in our torches? How long did we live with it before we finally realised we weren't alone? Was it here every step of the way? A door out of nothing that leads to nowhere, at least most of the time. Because I know for a fact it does not always open into a blank wall. There is something behind it. I can hear it shuffling around there in wet breath rattling in its lungs. A horrible sound I hear roaming these halls when it thinks I'm asleep. I listened to Daniel, fascinated by this strange, compelling rant, when movement caught my eye. An infrared camera running in the dark, its image a rolling mess of uniform noises. What was it I'd seen? I paused the tape and rewound, squinting. I saw 2 pinpricks of light in the darkness, just over Daniel's shoulder. Slowly the image resolved itself in my mind. I knew what I was seeing, and it turned my blood to ice. Miranda Vance had turned her head, and her lifeless eyes glowed as she fixed them on the back of Daniel's head. Not even any point leaving at this stage. I am no doctor, but that dog off radiation to, well, kill a family of 7. If none of us had touched it, being in the same room is risky, but not lethal. But given how sick we've become, it's pretty obvious our curiosity got the better of us, one by one. We've all got too close. Or maybe not. Maybe that thing on the other side came through and did this. I don't even know. Wait, what was that? Daniel turned and the camera stopped recording. The image it froze on was of a lone man, bright as a star in the camera's lens, facing off against unknown darkness, broken only by 6 pairs of glowing white eyes. I became painfully aware of my position relative to the table, and I had the painful premonition that if I turned, those chairs would not be empty, and I would see the Vances, all of them, Daniel as well, waiting for me. Heads turned, bodies left to rot for years in the dark. Behind me something shifted. It breathed, loud, quick. I knew what it was. I knew. It came at me so fast that when I felt something hot and wet touch my hand, I screamed, only for the presence to suddenly recoil. But then, without hesitation, it leapt at me and bore me to the ground. I wept as Ripley licked my face. He was shivering and, worst of all, silent, which was not normal. He was not a quiet dog, not when greeting me and not when he was excited like he is now. But whatever he'd seen down here, he clung to me and dug his paws into my shoulders like he wanted to be cradled over the shoulder, something he has been too big to do for years. Oh, you fucking idiot, I cooed in a soft whisper, and even in the dark I could feel his tail wagging. Joking aside, I felt nothing but relief at finding him. Let's get the hell out of here. I picked him up, straining a little under the weight, but refused to give in to tired muscles, and made for the ladder. It wasn't easy. climbing the 3 or 4 rungs to the hatch, but I managed it and gave the hatch a shove. First one hand, then two, again and again, with everything I had, but still that hatch refused to budge. Shit! I cried while pounding at it with my fist, but all I achieved was a sore wrist. The hatch had jammed when somehow the handle had been snapped clean off. Now I needed a pair of pliers or something to cut through the metal bar, locking it shut. My fingers couldn't move it, nor could I brute force the hatch open. The metal bar was an inch thick, and at the very least I needed some tools to get it from the side. At least it's fixable, I thought as I climbed back down and caught my breath. On one wall I noticed a simple diagram of the bunker made in chalk. It had 3 floors. On the bottom was storage. Daniel had mentioned that before, and I noticed he had drawn through it with a large red X, and the top floor was labelled quarters, where I stood now, but the middle floor was labelled workshops. And it was there I realised that I'd find what I needed. There was one door that opened into a concrete stairwell, and standing at the top, I shone my light down the spiral guardrails, unsure of what it was I hoped to see. There were only harsh shadows and the sense of something foul rising up the air, a smell that tickled my throat and burned a little in my lungs. Had the police even gone down this far? Had they seen what I'd seen on that TV and just left? Somehow I thought it was unlikely. That had been enough to send the entire sheriff's department running. So was it something else that had done it? Something that had been enough to terrify dozens of armed men? Something that was most definitely down there? The door. I went down quietly. At first I considered leaving Ripley behind, but after losing him the first time I decided I'd rather risk it, just to know that he was right next to me. Besides, he was being quieter than I was, and I didn't feel much like going down those stairs on my own. He accompanied me with only the quiet click-clack of his paws on concrete, a sound I found deeply comforting as I barely managed to keep my torch from shaking in my hand and my breathing steady. Oh my god. Down one floor, and I found the workshop exactly as you might expect. A large space filled with generators and fuel, water tanks and boilers and heaters, and pretty much anything and everything that you need to survive, but which you couldn't put outside due to fallout. Wires, pipes, and tubes that ran from one end of the room to the other, and even years later, most of the machinery still hummed in the pitch-black emptiness, an idea I found deeply unsettling. Taking one look at the strange tangle of harsh shapes and industrial figures looming out of the walls and floor, I shivered and looked around, quickly finding a small area Daniel had cornered off for his own use, about a fifth of the total floor space. There was a large workbench and some seriously high-end machining equipment. Excuse me. All very well used. Lathes, buzzsaws, drills, belt sanders, welding torches. Everything a man needed to do it himself. And Daniel had been busy. I'm not sure exactly what he'd been working on, but there was an arm on the bench. It sat atop a pile of papers that had slowly turned brown over the years until the whole thing looked like it'd been soaked in tobacco spit. On the whiteboard was faded, but still a visible diagram of what looked like a ball and socket joint. I thought of the tape of Daniel's little mechanism to keep his family upright, and then looked at the arm and suppressed a momentary gag reflex. I don't know if Dan had been working on posable limbs or just a way to put the decomposing remains back together so after they'd started to fall apart, but the size of the arm suggested a preteen child, and he just left it out on the surface like it was a disassembled clock. It was also missing a finger. Just how fucking crazy was he? I wondered as I pinched my nose with one hand and began overturning boxes, looking for a hefty pair of pliers or maybe a hacksaw. Ripley backed away from the noise, but once I made sure he wasn't going anywhere, I carried on grabbing and pulling at box after box, hoping I'd find what I was looking for. Anything to break that fucking metal bar. In the end, I managed to get a pair of bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a heavy-duty pair of pliers. One went in my back pocket, one went down the back of my jeans, and the other was clutched in my fist, too large to be tucked away in my clothes. The bolt cutters felt hefty in my hand, which was a bit of comfort, but that feeling didn't last long. Something moved in the darkness. Out there in the twisted jungle of shadows cast by all those pipes and wires that ran from one machine to the next, a figure moved, thin, but unmistakably human in its outline. I couldn't help but remember what I'd seen on that tape. Surely it couldn't have been real. Maybe Daniel had rigged something up, some fishing wire on a motor maybe. The idea that those bodies had been moving of their own. I couldn't be sure of that, could I? It was a frightening idea, one my mind had latched onto out of sheer panic, that was all. And then I saw them, a pair of white pinpricks reflecting back at me from the depths of the cluttered room. Oh, night brainness. And then I saw them, a pair of white pinpricks reflecting back at me from the depths of the cluttered room. Ripley, already behind me, had nuzzled into my legs, pushed even closer against me, and let out a barely audible whine under his breath. The behaviour of a dog who was terrified, close to pissing himself with fear. Just a bit of metal, I told myself, as the light shook so violently in my hand. I struggled to see straight. Just 2 shiny bits of metal. They blinked and began to come towards me, If I had any doubts left, they were dispersed by the sight of a pale white hand emerging into the light. I ran straight to the stairs and went to climb them, but only 1 or 2 steps in I saw something gripping the handrail on the top floor. A mouldy clump of flesh, only just recognisable as a fist. The flesh withered until the fingers were basically bone. Without meaning to, I brought my light up out of habit, and I saw the bloated face of a hairless corpse glaring down at me. I couldn't even tell you if it had been a teenage girl or the 60-year-old Daniel. Either way, I instinctively turned and found another body shambling towards me out of the workshop. I was trapped, nowhere to go. By the feel of warm fluid on the back of my leg, I could tell Ripley had finally pissed himself. An adult dog, tail between his legs, shivering like a puppy and desperate to be picked up. God, I needed him to stay together for just a bit longer. I couldn't take him in my arms, but I couldn't leave him behind either. With nowhere to go, I ran down and entered storage. There was a temptation to stop once I hit the bottom. Down here the air was thicker, and the sounds of my breathing were muted, somehow distant. But I only had to look back up to see 3 pairs of glowing eyes glaring down at me. So without giving it much further thought, I barreled down the corridor and stumbled into a door at random. Opening it, I saw what looked like your standard storage room. Only most of the shelves had been overturned, and the food left to rot on the floor. 1 or 2 shelving units were still upright, though, and their shelves were covered in tall, opaque boxes that made them a fantastic hiding spot. That, I decided, would have to be where I crouched down and turned off my light. I was already inside when I realised that wasn't all that was in there. The door almost looked normal. I could see why Daniel must have been confused by it, because it looked a little bit like all the other doors down there. But it was different too. It was too tall and too wide, about a foot and a half off the ground, and the metal rusted in its entirety, like it had aged out of sync with everything else down there. All around the jamb was a profusion of wet, soppy moss, like the kind you find hanging off trees in a swamp. And every few seconds the door would leak something strange and oily, like the kind of thing you find in a parking lot on a rainy day. Of course, that wasn't too strange in itself, but the leak was horizontal, defying gravity, so that every few seconds a large glob of the stuff would whip across the room and slap onto a wall on the opposite, creating a puddle about the size of a man that defied all reason. Remembering Daniel's words about the radiation, I instinctively inched away from this puddle and the door on the opposite wall, backing myself into the darkest, quietest corner I could while I pulled Ripley behind me and hoped to hell he wouldn't that he wouldn't give me away. Once I was in there, I turned off my light and waited. I must have waited longer than I'd thought to hide, because it was barely 2 seconds. Oh, I must have taken longer than I thought to hide. Oh, okay. No. I must have taken longer than I thought to find a hiding spot. because barely 2 seconds later, because it was barely 2 seconds later when a few figures entered the room. It was pitch black after I turned off my torch, but they made enough noise to let me know that at least 2 of them had stumbled in after me. I stayed there, unable to see anything, not sure if they were heading straight for me or just getting ready to leave, forced to hold out and let luck decide my fate. When I finally heard something scrape against the wall barely 2 feet from where I stood, I gave up and switched my light on, desperate to know what was coming for me. The sound had been terribly misleading. Daniel Vance was no more than 6 inches from my face. "Get out!" he hissed from a toothless and cracked mouth, a living corpse just like the others. Somehow a flash of intelligence remained in those wide, terrified eyes. And then I heard it, the creaking of a door, and without even thinking, I turned the light and I saw it on the wall. I saw it open, and behind the strange steel there was more than just plain old concrete. Much more. I saw a raging gullet of flesh, a ringed tube of pulsing muscle lined with teeth the size of hands, a spiraling descent into madness. Hot, fetid air washed into the room, buffering me with the rotting corpses, all of us paralysed by what we were seeing, even if for most of the figures beside Daniel and myself, they didn't have eyes to see it with. "What the fuck?" I muttered, unable to take my eyes from the flesh tube beyond that doorway. "It's coming," Daniel whispered, as he grabbed me with one fist and hurled me out of the room. I hit the floor and skidded along the slick fluid left behind by the Vance's footprints, the smell of which turned my stomach. Perhaps the worst detail was that it was cold. I don't know why. I just expected whatever oozed off them to be feverishly hot, but it wasn't. It soaked my shirt like I'd fallen into a muddy puddle. "It's coming." This voice wasn't Daniel's. I couldn't say for sure, but it sounded like a child's whisper. One by one the bodies shuffled over to the open door and knelt before it. I don't know why, but I got the impression the others had lost pretty much everything left of their minds. But Daniel remained aware. He had looked back at me once more and spoke before he pressed his head to the floor in supplication with the others. "The only thing we did wrong was being here for it to torture. And it didn't need a reason, just an opportunity. Leave. It won't let us go. It won't even let us die. And if it catches you, it won't let you go either." His forehead kissed the dirt. And then something reached through the door and gripped his head in its palm, the way you or I might pick an apple. In full panic, I ran over and grabbed my dog and the bolt cutters and ran like my legs were pistons, machines whose signals of exhaustion and fatigue could not slow me down or cause me to fail. I had to move. I had to leave. The hand that grabbed Daniel, the sight of it flushed my mind like some kind of enema. It hurt to see the image replay in my mind, but there's nothing else in my head echoing around except for the sight of fingers with one too many knuckles and nails as large as a smartphone.
I reached the top floor and nearly collapsed from breathlessness, but I wouldn't let myself stay down for long. I crawled over to the ladder and climbed up, and immediately went to work trying to cut the metal lock. It was hell with just one hand, the other clinging to the torch that I kept frantically pointing at the door behind me, and it wasn't long before I fumbled one too many times and dropped my only source of light. No, I mewed, but there was no time to look for it. I had to get out, and I had to get out fast. I couldn't see, but I was sure I could hear something climbing those stairs, not the steady thump, thump of human feet. No, this was different. This was a rapid pitter-patter of a spider, maybe. Something with hundreds of feet or hands, God knows what, skittering along the floor and walls and ceiling, pulling itself along with a body whose mere shape would offend God. Using all my strength, I leaned hard on the bolt cutters, and at last the bolt gave. I threw the hatch open and got just enough ambient light to see Ripley hovering at the bottom of the ladder, growling inefficiently at the doorway. I crouched down and scooped him up and fled up the ladder, so quickly that my muscles turned to jelly at the top and I fell over onto hands and knees. But still I was out. The long corridor covered in writing was ahead of me, and at the very end of the doorway, capped now by the tired blue light of a full moon. Ripley needed no encouragement. He whipped down the corridor with canine speed, and I followed at a broken and stumbling crawl. Eventually I shouldered past the open door and collapsed onto the forest floor. A few seconds and I drifted in and out of consciousness. But when I looked up and saw the canopy overhead moving, the branches backlit by a full moon, I snapped awake and glared down at something gripping my ankles. The hand had reached out of the dark and seized me, and was slowly dragging me back into the earth below. Whatever it was, most of its body lurked out of sight in the shadows behind the doorway. But the hand that crushed my leg was the size of my torso, with an arm that looked like it belonged to a mole rat. Excuse me. I struck at it with my own fists. I dug my nails in. I cried and kicked and screamed, but nothing could stop it. From behind the door, something like a face grinned and leered at me with joy. It was taking its time, sure enough, pulling me in so slowly that it gave my mind all the time in the world to appreciate the nightmare that awaited me. I think if in that moment you'd given me a gun, I would have shot myself, because God help me, I couldn't escape the look in Daniel's eyes, how he'd knelt to worship this thing, like a man who knew that hope or pride or joy or anything with even a hint of goodness to it was so far out of reach for him, it might as well be a dream. How long was this thing going to keep me? How long was this thing going to keep them down there? How long did he intend to keep me? I wept like a child, feeling my mind was slowly cracking as I tried everything to stop that fucking thing pulling me into the shadows. I kicked at the earth. I dug into it using my hands, looking for a root or a pipe, anything to hold on to. Nothing I did would sew it down. I was no more than a foot from the doorway when Ripley appeared. A dog, afraid of hoovers and plastic bags, and doors that moved on their own. A dog who once got stared down by a particularly feisty rabbit who stopped mid-chase and turned around, baffling the predator on its tail. A dog you couldn't even watch scary movies around. And he lunged at the arm like he was a wolf, like he'd always been one. And while he didn't quite break the skin, the pressure was enough to make the thing's grip weaken, and I slid my leg out. Unable to stand, I knelt and grabbed the dog and pulled as hard as I could, and now that fucking thing bled. At last, as the pressure of its jaw and the sliding teeth ripped into its flesh. Together at last, Ripley and I were let go and sent rolling backwards head over heels. I wasted no time waiting or looking or processing. I heaved the dog onto my chest and crawled until I passed out, making it maybe 1/2 kilometre away. Only when I could no longer see the door did I let myself fall onto the ground, face first, and gave up consciousness. The doctor said I had pneumonia, which I suppose made kind of sense. I might have even believed them if it were not for the sheriff's visit, asking strange questions of me as I lay in bed about what I may or may not have seen. I dismissed them to the best of my ability. I wasn't interested in chatting that particular nightmare down. Figuring out if it had been real or not, at least not while I lay there half drowning in my own infection. To be fair, I had at least some sympathy for why the police had done so little to seal that place off. I have on occasion thought about going and doing the job myself, but to this day I still have nightmares about being pulled into the dark beyond that door. And not just the bunker door, the ones I narrowly avoided at the end, but the one below. What I saw was a kind of madness, I'm sure of it, and I often think of Daniel's words. It didn't need a reason, just an opportunity. Somehow the Vances were that opportunity. Maybe they built their bunker on a ley line or a weak spot between dimensions, the site of a former satanic ritual. I'm not sure it even matters. They went into the dark, thinking it'd be a safe place to wait out the world's troubles. But something had been down there waiting for them, waiting for a chance to get a family of 7 people, to lock them in and deprive them of escape, and slowly take from them everything it could. I've moved since then. I couldn't help it. It was just the memories, you see. It was a short way. Oh, I've moved since then. Couldn't help it. It wasn't just the memories, you see. It was the shortwave radio I kept in my basement. Something my father passed on to me when I was just a boy. God, I'd forgotten about it. At least until I woke up one day to the sound of it blaring white noise down in the dark. And buried in that sound was the faint whispering of a man, his voice barely recognizable, but unmistakably his. Let them go, 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 let them go. And that's the end of that one. This was by someone called Christian Wallace. And like, my God, this was really good. That one. I really like that one. What did you guys think? This person is a really good writer. I believe so. I'm not sure. Hang on, let me see if the writer has done comments. Because there's a lot of comments. This has been very popular on Reddit. Can't see any comments by the poster. No. Can't see. And there's like 300 comments. I'm not gonna look through all 300. That's just gonna take too long. But yeah, so I'm gonna call it for the night. Are there any particular things that you guys would like me to read? Let me know. So like, I'm not great at comments and keeping up with them. I'm not deliberately trying to ignore anyone who comments or anything like that. I know like not many people comment anyway. You know, it is what it is. But like on the off chance you do comment and I've not seen it or replied to it, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just really shit at doing that kind of thing. You know, so like apologies. But do either like on Discord message me or put a comment and ask and let me know what kind of things you'd like me to read, or just say now in the live chat. I'll give it a minute. And yeah, you can tell me. And
while I wait, actually, I'll say, so the history side of the horror thing, now the supposed moving is not happening, well, for now, that's going to be back on, because before I was not going to be able to do it, because, the time that I would need to dedicate to, like, starting to learn how to actually, like, fucking edit videos and do all that was going to be dedicated to, packing, packing everything I own into boxes, throwing stuff out because I can't afford to store all of it, and having a mental breakdown. But now I don't have to allocate time for those kinds of things. Yeah, I can try and do the actual videos. Fun, fun, fun. Yeah, I just realised that that's like actually functional. Okay. Well, no comments, so I'll leave it. Right. I'm going to go hang out in the Dungeon Queen's Discord. So, anyone that's in there, I will see you there. Have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And yeah, have fun trying to sleep. Bye.